Ladies and gentlemen, Jasmine Crockett is doing some after the fact forensic work in the Karmelo Anthony case.
Was it a switch? I don't know what he
It
had.
was like it seemed like it was a multi-tool, almost like a Swiss
Like
Army
with
for
the
lack of.
like with the little scissors and everything and
Mhm,
whatever. So
mhm.
it was small. Well, I would have argued the size of it alone, you wouldn't even think it's a deadly weapon.
I'm Rich Lowry of National Review, and that was the Texas Congresswoman discussing the murder case involving Austin Metcalf, high schooler, killed by another high schooler named Karmelo Anthony. This case would be uncontroversial. It wouldn't be a topic of national discussion at all, except Metcalf was white, Anthony is black. Therefore, you have a lot of voices on the left trying to find any reason to absolve Anthony or say this case is all about race or somehow illegitimate. And there you see Crockett saying it couldn't have been a deadly weapon, the weapon that, as it turned out, Anthony used to murder Metcalf because it was so small. But by definition, since it killed him, it's a deadly weapon. I shouldn't laugh, but this argument is so absurd. Here's more from Crockett.
If a 300-pound man is beating me, like on top of me and beating me down, I'm not limited to fist. I would argue that even the only time we go into things like people's hands being considered deadly weapons is typically like if they're a professional boxer or that kind of stuff. But I think by the time you start getting to like football player, good argument. Good freaking argument. We're not talking about like the golfers.
Okay, so what Croc is referring to there is that Metcalf was a football player, in fact, a star linebacker, and she wants to suggest that this made him a kind of walking deadly weapon, even though the knife supposedly wasn't. But the fact is, Anthony was a football player as well. They both also ran track, and that's how this confrontation comes about. If you go to a high school track meet, you'll see each team has their own tents where they hang out, and that was the case here. Starts to rain, and Anthony, for some reason, from a different high school, goes in to Metcalf's tent, goes in to the tent from another high school. And this is just something you don't do. He's asked repeatedly to leave. He won't. He's acting aggressively. He tells Metcalf, touch me and find out, in a threatening manner. Metcalf shoves him to try to get him out of the tent. And this part is not in dispute. Anthony stabs him in the chest, drops the knife, runs, detained by coaches, and eventually the police admits on the spot that he did it, argues that it was self-defense. Now, there's a lot of confusion about self-defense, especially in states like Texas that have these so-called stand your ground laws. Progressives have created a lot of confusion around those laws. Stand your ground does not change the basic concept of self-defense. It's a provision that's bolted on to self-defense. So you can defend yourself with deadly force if you believe reasonably that your life is in danger. Stand your ground says if you do think your life is in danger, you're under no obligation to retreat. You can stand and defend yourself. But what happened here seems to be that actually Anthony was the one who was threatening, because when you tell someone, put your hands on me and find out, that's a threatening statement. By some accounts, he had a hand in a bag, suggesting that perhaps he had a weapon. So he's the one engaged in threatening behavior there. Now, Metcalf does shove him, but that is not putting his life in danger. That's not a deadly threat. So it's not lawful to respond by murdering Metcalf. And by the way, we know that Anthony could have just exited this tent in this situation at any time, because he actually does run away after it happens. Now, there have been attempts by his defense attorneys to say, oh, actually, it was self-defense, because it wasn't just Metcalf. There was this whole crowd, this whole mob that was coming in and threatening Anthony. That notion fell apart at the trial.
Anthony's defense attorneys say he stabbed Metcalf, who was unarmed, out of fear as a group was, quote, turning on him. But prosecutors yesterday in court showed jurors surveillance footage they say tells a different story. The footage, it's grainy and shot from a distance, but reporters inside the courtroom tell us it shows a brief confrontation between Anthony and Metcalf, not a larger group, before Anthony runs from the scene. And that fight, it only lasted about 4 minutes or so. Jurors heard emotional testimony from Metcalf's track coach. The coach testified and said athletes don't just go under other teams' tents. This is something that's understood between the athletes.
You heard in that report, by the way, what I mentioned earlier. It just wasn't done that you go into someone else's tent. There was no mob trying to kill Anthony. He stabbed Metcalf in the chest, created this horrific wound that killed him at the scene. No doubt that he did it. He instantly confessed. People saw him do it. It wasn't a case of self-defense. So the jury did what any jury would do in such a circumstance. It found Anthony guilty of murder, and this has occasioned the belching of the most toxic racialist arguments from Anthony's defenders. Here's a minister named Dominic Alexander, who's founded a social justice organization, speaking up after the trial.
Not one black soul on a jury.
All his life.
And all white jury. And right now, what we are seeing is a travesty. It lets us know that black lives do not matter in the criminal justice system. It lets us know that we are not going to be afforded the same laws as anybody else. And I give a damn about nobody that feels like I'm playing the race card here. For 400 years, our people have been at the liberty and have had to suffer at the liberty of these laws. I'm speaking facts because that blood of slavery is in my blood, not yours.
The thing about the jury being all white, that's just a lie. He was there. He knows what's going on in the case. He knows there are minorities on the jury. There just weren't black jurors. They were struck for reasons that the judge considered legitimate, including that some of them were educators and they were therefore felt to be too close to the circumstances of this kind of case. But out of the 12 jurors, 3 were minorities, 8 were women. And if you include alternates, that's 18 total jurors, 6 were minorities. But this just goes to how racialist and reductive the worldview is here, that other minorities don't count. They're black people and everyone else is effectively white. And by the way, with regard to this case supposedly showing that black lives don't matter, what? Anthony killed Metcalf. The black guy killed the white guy. The race shouldn't matter. But how do we turn that around and say this is a case that shows that black lives don't matter? I can understand it makes some intuitive sense, even though there's oftentimes extenuating circumstances or the cases are being totally distorted, when a cop shoots an unarmed black guy saying, oh, that shows black lives don't matter. But how do you get to that position when it's the black guy who's murdered someone else and is now going to pay a price for it and go to jail for a very long time? But there's a lot of insanity out there. Here's some more.
All right. I said as a former prosecutor, this was a legal lynching that happened in this slaughterhouse. This is a slaughterhouse. This is not a courthouse. This courthouse is designed when you will come here and you look like us to slaughter you.
That's another one of Anthony's advocates. A lynching? Come on. A lynching, you take an innocent person or you take someone who's been accused of something before they've had a legal proceeding and you lynch the person or you kill them in some other way. That's not what happened here. Anthony had a full and fair trial with an outcome that any reasonable observer would have expected given the facts of the case. Now, she points at the courthouse and says, that's a slaughterhouse. They'll slaughter you if you look like we do. Slaughter you. Oh, please, lady, come on. Anthony slaughtered Metcalf. It was, by all accounts, shocking in the courtroom when images were shown of this wound. The family had to leave. So this is just completely perverse. But a lot of people seem to think if you can play the race card, it should literally be a get out of jail card. Now, maybe she has more of an excuse because she's a family member, but I believe this is Anthony's grandmother leaving the courthouse.
Racist! That a white person can hit a black boy and hit a white man.
That's it.
Yeah. They can do whatever.
Now, she's saying there at the end, a white kid can hit a black kid and get away with it. Get away with it? Really? He's dead. He's dead. It'd be one thing to shove the kid and get shoved back, but he got stabbed in the chest. And that is not acceptable. That's considered murder in any society, under any legal system, in any moral universe. And just the callousness towards the true victim of this crime is off the charts, which brings us back to Jasmine Crockett.
Black women, especially Black women who have Black male children, live in fear and agony every single day. A fear and agony that I promise you, the Metcalfs probably never spent a day living that way.
Really? The Metcalfs don't know fear or pain? They just lost a son who was killed in cold blood. I'm sure Black mothers worry over their children. All mothers worry over their children. But the lesson here should be don't bring a knife to a track meet. Don't get an unnecessary confrontation at a track meet. Don't stab someone in the chest at a track meet. It's very simple. But for folks like Jasmine Crockett, everything is a morality tale about race, and Blacks are always the victim, even if they are the one wielding a knife and ending the life of a fellow young person. Hey, by the way, comment, like, and subscribe. I guarantee you won't regret it. I'm Rich Lowry, over and out.